Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to today's session, which is all about hybrid working report for financial services. My name is David Callaghan. I'm the Modern Workplace lead here at WM Reply. If you didn't know, just a little bit of background and context to why we're here today. So WM Reply commissioned IPSOS MORI earlier in the year to conduct some research for us all around what does hybrid working mean for financial services? How are we looking at this as a challenge? What plans are we making, etc.? And I guess, what is the data telling us? So IPSOS MORI, what they did for us is they looked into research that already exists, and then they interviewed kind of senior IT professionals from the industry to get their inside knowledge, their thoughts and their feelings about what's going on with hybrid work. So, I think I'm just going to move forward. There we go. So in terms of where we are, it's no surprise that we haven't completely figured this out yet. If you look in the media, the newspapers, this is still very much a hot topic. And when you kind of look at where we're going, we haven't really figured this out yet. And as we go throughout kind of the stats and our thoughts today, please do go ahead and ask us questions through the event. We'll be covering them at the end, so it'd be great to get your thoughts, your opinions, and if you've got any questions for us. So almost taking a step back, if I go back to when we were in 2021, Microsoft launched some data all around the workplace. It's called their Work Trend Index report. And what we saw from that was that a paradox was emerging as we started to leave and exit COVID. So what was interesting is 73% of people wanted a form of working from home, remotely, hybrid to remain. However, at the same time as wanting that, 67% of people wanted good in-person collaboration. So how can we start to accommodate this as a business, as an organisation? It's a huge challenge because we've got that pull of, remaining, working from home, the way we'd adapted to when we had to during lockdowns. But when we came into those offices, we wanted that to be really worth it and to have that time and that experience with our colleagues together. And as we've kind of emerged out of the pandemic and we've got back to the offices more, one of the first things that we can start to think about is actually how are we treating hybrid? And what's interesting about the report, if you have a look, is that at the moment, we're treating it as two very separate, distinct models. So we're treating it as I work from home or I work from the office. So we haven't really married the two together. And in a true hybrid working model, we would be bringing that together and blending our ways of working. So what we need to be doing is think about how we move past this way of treating as if and that and start to blend it together. Now, for financial services in particular, what's very interesting is that if we go back to pre-pandemic again, in financial services, only 29% of financial service organisations had around 60% of the workforce working from home once a week. So it's a really low amount of people who were embracing the idea of working remotely. And in comparison to other industries were averaging, and so just averaging 36%. So financial services a little bit behind that way of working. Now, obviously, as we entered the pandemic, we needed to accommodate that new way of working. Things changed very quickly overnight. But obviously, if that's where we were, where are we going? And the biggest question we probably get asked, I probably get asked on, maybe you've been asked yourself, is around days in the office. How many should it be? Is it 1? Is it 3? Should I be prescribing the number of days in the office, etc.? And so when we look at it globally, around 2/3 of all working adults surveyed said that they wanted that flexibility in the amount of time to go into the office. And I think the key word there is probably flexibility. Now, very interestingly, for financial services, the vast majority, so 69% of people, also said that they would prefer to work just 2 days a week or less in the office. And I think the key phrase there being or less. And if you look at it from a generational point of view, younger workers needed more time to have that, good in-person communication and actually, engage with more experienced and senior people. And so the number of days we spend in the office is really going to depend on who we are, what our job is, our proximity to where we work, and also the team that we have around us. But even before we get to days in the office, the other thing we really need to be thinking about is our hiring and retaining of our talent. Just before I take you through some of the information here, it was very interesting when the CEO of LinkedIn recently was talking about that pre-pandemic, only 2% of jobs advertised on LinkedIn were remote. Funnily enough, in March 2022, so earlier this year, that had increased dramatically to 20% of jobs being completely remote. But as we've kind of worked out if we're in the office, out the office, or what hybrid means for us, that has dropped down. So by August this year, the number of jobs being fully remote had dropped down on LinkedIn to 15%. So we're starting to see, the market and things change. And I don't remember the exact statistic, but within remote workers pre-pandemic, we're actually seeing an increase in the number of people who want to come into a hybrid workplace because they've worked from home for so long that they actually want that people contact, etc. Now, in terms of what we can do with hiring and retaining talent, when surveyed, 63% of people of organizations, this is, so HR departments in businesses and organizations, so 63% of them responded saying that they expected to see an increase of more applications of people who lived more than 1 to 2 hours away versus 2019. So our pool of talent has gotten geographically wider. 25% of them expected to see more applications from people who lived outside of the UK. Now, see, for some organisations, that isn't going to be something that can be accommodated because of HR policies, tax, etc. But it's interesting to see that those they expected to see such an increase in applications from outside of the UK. 41% of workers themselves were actually considering quitting or changing professions in 2021. Now, what's interesting about this is if you look at data that comes from the ONS, the Office of National Statistics in the UK, we really didn't see a lot of changes of roles. What we saw was an increase in resignations, but employees seeking a new job in the UK actually didn't return to pre-pandemic levels. So people actively saying, I am looking for a new job, didn't increase. But what we have seen is people becoming less economically active. So either early retirement, going into education, and they simply respond that they do not want or are not actively seeking a job at that time. So we've got a certain percentage of the workforce who've actually left recently. And finally, 51% of UK workers said if the choice was removed of having hybrid work, they would consider leaving their company. So that's over half of people saying if that hybrid working option was removed, they would leave their role. Now, I mentioned at the start that as part of the work that IPSOS MORI did, they also spoke to people, spoke to senior IT executives at organisations. And one of the most interesting quotes that we actually got back directly from the organisations were around people and turnover. So I think organisations were accepting that people are simply going to vote with their feet. And actually, the way we treat hybrid fundamentally needs to change. And we need to think about our talent pool that's available to us, but also our existing people. And so if you look at progression and what someone, how someone progresses in an organisation and what they're going to do, 67% of people felt disconnected from their colleague working remotely during lockdown. I'm sure that isn't a huge surprise. We couldn't physically be co-located in the same place. And so actually we felt that disconnection. As we've come out of that and more people have returned to the office, hopefully that started to mend itself. But on the other side of this, 60% of people, 60% responded saying they believed it would harm their career if they admitted to their supervisor that they would prefer to work remotely. So that is a large number of people basically concerned about that whole leadership and manager dynamic of the office and the work environment, because they didn't want to feel like it was a bad or a negative thing to say, I want to work more remotely or completely remotely. Now, if you follow the information and the data that's coming out of Microsoft, you might have seen that recently they launched their latest Work Trend Index report. This is only a few weeks old. And as part of that, we saw some really interesting statistics coming out of this. The first one of which is that this productivity paranoia that we have, 81% of employees say it's important that their managers help them prioritize their workload. So it's really, really key that they get that information as soon as they can. 31% of people say that their managers have given them clear guidance during one-to-ones. So that is only 31% of people saying that their manager has given them that clear guidance on what they should be doing and how they should be prioritizing their work. 74% of people managers say that they themselves actually need more guidance on prioritizing their own work, and that would help their performance and obviously their team's performance as well. And finally, 80% say that they personally benefit from more clarity from senior leadership on impactful priorities. So they want to hear from their leaders. Now, why is this important? And what is productivity paranoia? Well, one of the most interesting stats to come from the latest Work Trend Index report that Microsoft launched was around paranoia and how productivity is being seen. And there is a stark disconnect between the portion of leaders who say that they have full confidence in their teams being productive and the proportion of employees who report they are productive at work. So our leaders, only 12% believed that their team or had the confidence that their team were being productive when working remotely in a hybrid setting. However, 87% of employees reported that they were being productive at work. So we have, it's a bit like at the start when we looked at the whole how do we accommodate this paradox. We've got a paranoia here, and our leaders and our employees are thinking very differently. Now, you might think that obviously you as an individual, you're going to report that you're being productive because obviously that's a good thing for you. You want to feel like you're being productive. You might not be negative or critical on yourself. But what's really interesting is the way that Microsoft got to this stat around 87% is they looked at the data and the information coming from Microsoft 365. So how long someone works, what's their work day like in terms of length of span, how many Teams messages, emails are they sending, are they still being active in these work hours? And the answer is yes, they are. So we are comfortable, and Microsoft are confident in this actually being the case. Now, a lot of this comes back to and down to trust. And this was a very telling quote that's in our report. And it's actually because it's about trust existing between our leaders and our employees. So I would say that the culture of this particular organization probably wasn't there before the pandemic. And so funnily enough, when people are working remotely from home, that trust doesn't exist. Productivity goes through the floor. And it's that whole culture of the organization that becomes a challenge. Now, these challenges, all this paranoia, all these paradoxes that we have, what can we do about it? How can we help you and other organizations kind of solve this? And it's interesting, the most asked for need of people is clarity. People need that clarity to help them prioritize their work and what they're doing. I don't think it's a huge surprise, any of these stats, that when clarity exists in terms of workload, in terms of priorities, in terms of vision of the organization and where things are going, that this is what happens. But I think that the nicest statistic on this page is this one. 4.5 times like to say they are happy at their current company when they have clarity and what the work priorities are. Now we can do this. We can really give this to people, and it's about how we're communicating and where we're communicating and supporting our middle managers to make that happen. But not just clarity is needed. I'm sure you've probably read a lot about, organizations having to reverse policies around number of days in the office because of, people basically saying, well, we're not going to do that. But on the flip side of that, how do we start to encourage people to go back into the office? And I think this is very, very true. People need a better reason to go in than just company expectations. I would argue that you can also say that company policy is also part of that as well. So people need a better reason than that. And it's very interesting. 73% of employees said that that's what they needed, a better reason to start going in. But what's even more interesting is that our business decision makers, so our senior managers, our exec team, not quite our C-suite, but our senior leaders in organizations, 78% of them agreed with that. So they are probably seeing it from their personal perspective, from the teams that they manage and look after, but also the fact that they're feeling the pressure from above and that it's just, oh, we want people back in the office. Now, how do you create that better reason to go into the office? If you look at the statistics and the data around this, it's very interesting. And it comes back to people. 84% would come back into the office more if there was the promise of socializing with co-workers. 73% of them, if they knew that their direct team members were there. 85% of them, if they could rebuild the team bonds that had been tested during the pandemic and the full remote working that we had. And 74% of them, if they knew that their work friends were there. And what this teaches us is what we always suspected before COVID. And that's that work is about more than getting the job done. It's about the people that we work with and the relationships that we build. And we can start to create reasons. We can start to help curate a culture to enable to make this happen. Because at the end of the day, we want to not just make this quote the reason why they're going in. I'm sure that's part of it. But actually, we want to be making sure that people are encouraged and that they feel that read and that there's a reason to go in by the fact that the people that they're working with, whether it be on projects or certain teams or departments, whatever it is, that they're coming in together. And yeah, that might be because as leaders, that helps us feel more confident and satisfied that actually people do know how the company works or how to get their job done. But as the data says, it's actually about the people connections that are more important. So armed with all this information, and there's a lot more in the actual report itself, where can we start and what can we do? Now, we've broken this down into 3 different areas. So I'm going to first of all just talk through platforms. So we know that there are so many different platforms out there in where we work. The IT and the technology that we use has probably a plethora of options. So let's start with some challenges. Challenge the rationale that prevents functionality and growth. And what we mean by this is that we need to be thinking about mindset. So really start to challenge the mindset that we have to have all these tools, but actually, what are we going to use? When are we going to use it? How are we going to use it? Let's start to really engage on that and really think about, how we can start to overcome what was the status quo. If we're working in a hybrid model, the way we were working before, whether it be our operating model or the tools and the platforms that we're using, maybe they're not fit for purpose anymore. And so that needs to be challenged and needs to be a conversation. And as an extension of that, let's cut out all those competing tools that we just don't need anymore. Let's make conscious decisions to streamline the employee experience and bring everything together into the best possible solution that we can. There might be exceptions that that are needed as part of that. That's absolutely fine. But the biggest question we always get is, what tool should I be using when? There's a whole suite out there and there's more on top of that, but let's make it as easy as possible for people to know what they should be using when. And finally, optimization. You might be an organization who is really embraced Microsoft Teams and you are using it for your meetings. People are starting to collaborate on documents through Teams. That's fantastic. But what else can you do? What applications can we build in? What lines of business processes can we build in? How can we bring our intranet into Teams through something like Viva Connections? Let's, again, come back to platforms, but let's bring it back to the end user experience and make it as easy for someone to use as possible. Planning. Now, this might be a bit obvious, but do the offices actually need to be rethought and their location? We've seen in the report that actually the number of organisations considering regional or hub models for their office so that they can offer, smaller co-working spaces out in regional areas. Maybe that's a huge benefit to them. Maybe people have moved out of central cities during COVID and actually they want to retain that talent, keep that culture, bring an office environment together. So that's one way of looking at it. The other would be, our physical workplaces and our spaces. Do we have enough meeting rooms? Do we have too many? Is there, spaces within the office where people can go and have smaller conversations or have a stand up? Is it really accommodating people's needs? It's time to stop separation. And what we mean by this is we want to bring together that one single hybrid working model. This relates to that first slide that I showed around, we treat it as workplace or working from home. Let's bring it together and create that truly embraced hybrid working model, and let's communicate it. Let's help support it with the right policies and guidance. Now, policy might be the wrong word, but what we often see in the workplace environment is that we need a bit of guidance, because if we're given, carte blanche, and we can do whatever we want, it isn't necessarily the best thing for us. So it's important that people have a framework to work within and that they are supported in exploring that. Maybe even just allowing teams and departments to agree how they're going to work is going to be the right thing for them, because they know what they're doing and how they work. And, it comes back to the first point here around our office space needs to be rethought. But what about our meeting rooms? What about how we're working there? When we were all working from home, we had that level playing field. We were all at a desk, on a sofa, wherever you were, joining Teams calls, joining whatever platform you're using, and we all had the same experience because we were all joining through that laptop lens. Now, if our rooms aren't set up to accommodate people being both in and out of the office, if you're not in that room and you can't really participate in the conversation, what a challenge that is going to be for you. And you'll probably start going back to the office more, even though you don't need to, simply because the technology isn't there to support you in the way of working. So let's really start to think about that. And not only just change the hardware, our meeting leaders, facilitators, let's coach them in how to host a really good hybrid meeting, because they're going to need to be consciously aware about the people not in the room. So let's help them in that. Let's not just assume that they know what they're doing or they're comfortable doing it, which nicely leads me onto people. So the last kind of pillar, I guess you could say, of hybrid working for us. So for people, location isn't everything. Change is more than that space. Yes, we need to get our offices in the right setup to accommodate hybrid working, but we need to make sure that people are supported in that change as well. That does come back to our policies, but obviously let's make sure that within those frameworks that we're creating, we're communicating them in the right way. People are supported in trying to achieve that hybrid working model, and let's test it. Let's really make sure that we are testing and challenging what we're doing all the time so we can figure it out together. Inclusion. So again, sounds really obvious, but let's make sure that we're involving people in the planning of this. Let's bring together their thoughts, their views, their opinions, and see how they can help us achieve really what we're trying to do. And then finally, evolution. So let's not just stop there. Let's be thinking about how we can communicate the need to evolve. with these working models, building out our ways of working. Let's not just do it. If it fails, let's just rip it out. Let's evolve and continuously improve together. And then, sorry, there is one more. Finally, lead by example. So our leaders need to lead us through this because we're looking to them for answers. We would always talk about, within a change, there needs to be an active and visible leader to help guide us through. And that's what we need here, because this is a change, it is a transformation, and we need to make sure that leaders are helping us, because what we don't want is, I don't know, a CEO to be saying you can come in 2 days a week, rest of the time working from home. But if that CEO themselves is maybe going in, 4 or 5 days a week, what's going to happen? People will start to come in 4 or 5 days a week because they think that's what should be happening. Just because the policy says something doesn't mean that's necessarily always the case. So let's make sure we lead by example together. And exactly as one of the quotes said in the actual report, if you don't practice what you preach, then people don't believe what you preach. And as I say, our leaders, can be big L leaders, our C-suite, our heads of departments, whatever it might be. But, there will be local leaders and influencers across every organisation who can help make this happen. And, as it says here, let's really embrace it and make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we've got that paradox on policy versus actions. So those are the highlights from the report that I wanted to take you through today. I hope you've enjoyed the overview. I'm going to just ask Carly if there have been any questions.
Thank you, David. Great session. I'm always so surprised to hear those stats every time. All right, so we did get a couple questions pop through here, and please, for anybody on the call still, if you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. But we'll start with this one. Do you think people self-identify as being more productive than they actually are?
Initially, when I read the report, I absolutely believed, that could be the reason why, we've got so many more people saying they're productive than their leaders are thinking that they are. But when you look into the detail more and actually realize that Microsoft did include all that extra data around, people's workday span, out of hours working, the amount of meetings that we're now attending, etc. Not that meetings are the best indication of are we productive or not. We really saw that actually that has increased dramatically over that time. I think that the average workday span since COVID has now increased something like 13%. And so the two marry up. And there's a phrase that's been going around quite recently around quiet quitting, which is kind of post-pandemic, people, organizations saying that workers might be trying to almost recoup that time that they spent flat out during COVID to then take it a bit easier, almost silently checking out of their job. But yet we're still seeing so much productivity and activity in something like, the Microsoft suite, that I think that people are genuinely being productive, and that sadly exceptions and a few are probably not, but they shouldn't obviously tarnish it for everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, great answer. Okay, so next up, somebody is wondering, at a high level, are there any quick fixes we can do right away to help this?
Ooh, quick fixes. I think for me, it's probably take a look at what are your policies now, what are you doing, where are you almost in this hybrid kind of working journey, because everyone is at a completely different stage and we're all trying to figure this out. What was very interesting about the launch a few weeks ago of the white paper is the number of financial service organizations who really said, yeah, we're still experimenting, we're figuring it out. And so I really just would take the opportunity to pause, reflect, and work out what your next steps are. For some, that's almost doing an impact assessment, what's going to be the case, how are we going to move forward to the next steps. And then I'd say the next logical step of that is almost bringing people together, like I said, in focus groups and even in maybe interviews one-to-ones. There's probably data that backs this up through annual surveys, and using that information to really, I guess, form in what is the next step we're going to take in trying to work out what hybrid means for us and our people.
Awesome. All right, just a couple more here. What do you recommend as the first step for starting this, which I'm realizing you kind of already answered. So we'll just move to the last one here, because those are good tips you gave us already, David. And this one is interesting because this stat also made me sort of sit up and take notice. But regarding the 51% that would consider moving if hybrid working was taken away, do you think that stat will at all be impacted by the ongoing cost of living crisis? I think this is a great question.
That is a really good question. I think it's still slightly an unknown. And I think it's going to be really difficult to forecast with great accuracy what the impact of this is going to be, simply because the cost of living crisis is an ongoing situation and challenge that everyone finds themselves in. And for some people, that question might be, is it cheaper for me to heat the house and charge my laptop and have the lights on and make cups of tea at home throughout the day? Or is it better that I go into the workplace because, that's all taken care of for me, but my commute might be a factor in that in terms of how much is it for me to get into the office. I would like to think that with that 51% quitting if hybrid was removed, that would still be a constant, even if the cost of living crisis wasn't a factor, because people want the flexibility, they want the choice and the option to almost make that decision for themselves. But as part of that mix, obviously the other thing that we saw, which was really nice, is the reasons why people would go back into the office or go into the office more was the connection with people, knowing that the team were going to be there, so I think that's more what people are considering at the moment. It's, oh, am I going to go into the office tomorrow? Oh, well, I know Carly is going to be in the office. I need to catch up with her about XYZ. I'm going to go in because it's worth me having a quick chat and a catch up with her. Versus, oh, well, I'm not really sure who's going to go in, so I'm not going to bother because I just don't simply know. So I think that is definitely something which hopefully, from a visibility point of view, is quite easy to fix. Whether you're using something like a group calendar, Outlook, Microsoft Spaces is something that's going to be coming in very shortly, which is going to show us, who's in when, how we declare that. Or even if you wanted to go down, building something like a Power App where you can, get people to declare, I plan to be on these days, so everyone has that visibility. There's many different ways of looking at it.
Awesome. Well, that's all for questions, David. Fantastic job. I'll let you finish us off here by letting us know what we can do to learn more. So where we can find a copy of this report and also how to get in touch if we have more questions.
Absolutely. So if you do have any questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch directly with me. My email is on the screen now. The copy of the report is available through our website. If you need to find it nice and easily, though, then check out our LinkedIn page, so WM Replies LinkedIn page, where all the links are published there as well. There's a link to it and you'll be able to download a copy. And if you then read it and again have any questions, please do let us know. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this afternoon. It's been a busy afternoon of announcements here in the UK, so I'm sure you weren't distracted at all by that previously. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining and hopefully see you soon.